Okay, and we are live. Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of the Skagit County Track and Field Podcast. We are now on episode 8, and our guest today is assistant coach at Burlington Edison High School, Mr. Ryan Wallace. Ryan, thank you very much for joining us.
Thanks for having me. Looking forward to this.
Coach Sakeld said you are a must-have on this podcast for your hurdle knowledge. So here we go.
Okay, well, hopefully I can bring it. So,
Ryan, we're going to start off by introducing, yourself to the listeners. We call this the 2-minute drill. We just want to give you we want you to give us your background as an athlete in high school all the way up to where you're at now, and also include any other sports that you're coaching.
Sure. So I am a homegrown Skagit Valley kid. Moved to Burlington when I was 4, but I say I'm homegrown. But grew up in the Burlington Edison School District all the way up through the high school, and then attended PLU, which we'll talk a little bit about, in Western Washington University. But growing up here in the Valley, I grew up as a sport kid. Youth sports, soccer, basketball, baseball were kind of my main things. And then, of course, what do you do when you get into high school? You choose to do tennis and track, which was completely different, but it was just something new and different. And really fell in love with track and field. And my dad and his brother were really good track and field athletes in California. So I kind of had that, those shoes to fill a little bit, but just kind of fell into my own at the high school level. I started as most freshmen do, not knowing what to do. My Coach Erickson, which we'll talk about later, he we'll just say encouraged me to do the hurdles, but I had no choice. But I fell in love with it, and that ultimately became my main event. I became high hurdles, 300 hurdles specifically, but I also had some sprint speed. So I was 4x1, 4x4. By senior year, I was the anchor on both. Made it to district finals in all 4 events, was league champion my senior year in the high hurdles, and made it to state, and placed 9th in state my senior year. And then the plan was to go off to PLU and compete for them. I felt that my times in high school were competitive enough to run Division II, Division III, and started training with them actually to be a high hurdler and a 400-meter hurdler. But then academics kind of won out, and that actually opened the door for the coaching opportunity where I decided to transfer to Western, contemplated maybe walking on there, but then the coaching opportunity happened to come up where I was a volunteer assistant, and that's where I have been now, entering my 23rd year as an assistant coach in track and field. I came on board when Kevin Gudgel took over as head coach, so we've been coaching together that time, and he was my coach for 2 years in high school as well. Other sports that I coach, I currently am the head boys tennis coach at Burlington Edison. This was my 11th year as head, and then 13th year overall. And then I coached girls basketball for 10 years as JV coach and varsity assistant. So you can see coaching is definitely a passion of mine, but if I were to rank them, track and field's number 1.
Awesome. As long as I've known you, I did not know that you and I had such similar paths. I did not know that you went to PLU and were one and done there.
Mm-hmm.
And honestly, both for academic reasons. Mine was because I damn near flunked out, so that's why I transferred. And then ended up at Western. That's cool.
Yeah, it's just the nature of it, and I chose PLU partially because of track and field. The coach was very interested in my times in high school. I was a sub 15 second high hurdler and flirting with sub 40 300 hurdles, and who knows what path would have taken me. But I don't know if I would necessarily be sitting here had I gone that path, or I've been coaching as long here at Burlington. So
yeah. Let's get into coaching in Skagit County. So you've obviously had your hand in a lot of different events and have seen things change through the years. Also, your perspective is unique because you're a runner in the county, in the county meet. So I guess my question, and you can make this specific to track or just in general, what do you feel is the best part about coaching in Skagit County?
I would say number 1, and I believe some other coaches probably are mentioning this too, is the true camaraderie that all of us coaches have in the county, regardless of what school we're at. we're competitors first, but we're also friends, and I think that creates really awesome relationships. Johnny, I ran against you in
Mhm.
high school, and then got to know you as a coach when you were at LaConner, and then Mount Vernon, now Cedro, and Jake same way. Just all of a sudden, you just people with similar interests just tend to gravitate towards each other, and I think we're really unique in this county where we have long-term head coaches, assistant coaches that know the sport, know the events. And then when we get together, we just brainstorm and share ideas. We're not, it's not proprietary, right? We just want to help our athletes be the best they can be. And so it's just so fun to be able to have that network of people in the county like this. And then my perspective for the county meet specifically, of course, goes back to when I was an athlete. And when you're a young athlete, and it was a different coaching staff back then, you just kind of knew it was just county was a thing. It was just a meet where all the schools got together. But then as I got older, the importance of it became greater. And so my junior year, we were over at LaConner for county, and I don't know if that was the first time ever in history running there, but I know that they had a brand new track my junior year, and that
The
was where
old the
county
old
was
six laner.
the old six laner, yeah.
Yep.
And then I know Gudgel mentioned in an earlier episode that Mount Vernon Christian boys won that meet, and it was the 6 lane factor, right? But I won both the high hurdle and 300 hurdle championships against Matt Kamick from Mount Vernon
Oh yeah.
Christian, and all of a sudden you just get this sense of pride getting that county championship. And then senior year, I got it in the high hurdles again. And then as a coach, and with the current, with Kevin as head coach, and just the history that we share with our athletes, we take pride in trying to get individual championships, the team championship, because it's a pride factor. And it's just so fun to see the schools, regardless 3A, 2A, 1B, 2B, it doesn't matter. Everyone's competing. So I think that's a very unique thing. And being the longest running track and field meet in the entire state of Washington, I think that's a cool thing that we get to all hang our hat on, that we all got to participate in as either an athlete or a coach.
Yeah, that's really good perspective. And before we move on to the next thing, I guess just a quick follow-up question. You had success in the county meet as an athlete, and Burlington has had a ton of success as a program, as a team. Do you feel you get a little bit more satisfaction, or is it just different, winning it as an individual or having one of your athletes win a county championship?
I would say, as a coach, it is so fun to see the athletes earn that championship or get a chance to compete. I know there was times where I want to have as many Burlington Edison athletes in that final. I just love hearing the announcer say Burlington
Mhm.
Edison, and I've been pretty lucky to have that. And I know right now, I think the two dominant teams are Burlington Edison and Cedro, because both Dave and I try to recruit every single kid to be a hurdler. But I think the pride is there, and I think maybe the kids don't know it in the moment, but hopefully when they reflect back on it, it's a pretty special deal to win a championship like that with such history in that meet.
Yeah, that's good.
All right.
Okay, Jake, you want to introduce our next
Yeah.
and newest segment?
So you're going to be on our newest segment. It may be the only time we do this, depending on how it goes. We'll see. No pressure. All
No
right. So
pressure.
we have a segment where we do rapid fire, where we're kind of firing out some questions, and it's really one word, and so we're still doing that one, but we want to kind of do a little bit of adjustment on it. So we're asking you, basically making a statement. You're going to tell us agree or disagree, and then we just kind of want a short follow up as to why you agree or disagree to the statement. And for us, it's kind of things that we thought about philosophically, but also things that we just kind of want to hear your opinion on,
Sure.
in terms of that. So it's hurdle focused, obviously, is that's why we have asked you to come on here. So my first one is, for 100, 110 hurdles, should they run the 300 hurdles, especially early in the season? So what's your philosophy in terms of your 100 hurdlers running the 300 hurdlers?
So is saying agree or disagree? This is going to, or secret choice option C, it depends.
That's fair.
So I would say, I would disagree that they have to. I really use that early season as trying to get them the most comfortable as possible. And whether it's in the high hurdles, if that's the route, yes, you have a shorter distance, but the hurdles are higher. 300 hurdles, they're lower, but you have to run 3/4 of a lap. And so those are conversations I have. But I honestly, as a kind of a philosophy standpoint, I don't pressure them to do both if they're not ready for both.
Perfect.
Okay. All right. My next one, hurdlers in the 100, 110 should only focus their practice on their primary lead leg.
Disagree wholeheartedly. Um, that's something where, and maybe we'll get to this later, but one of my key philosophies as a hurdle coach specifically is to coach my athletes in ways that maybe I wasn't coached and where I wasn't able to reach my fullest potential. And I feel that being able to alternate is a huge advantage. And all of my hurdlers, they will do every drill, every technique, left leg, right leg, lead leg, trail leg. It does not matter. That was not how I was coached. And I feel, and again, you're not going to think like that as a 16, 17, 18-year-old. But I feel had I been coached like that, I feel that I could have been that much faster because I know in the 300 specifically, I lost time not being able to alternate because we didn't work on striding or anything like that. It just was right lead leg, and a lot of times I had to stutter step to get there. And as hurdle coaches, that we all know that that's where you lose time. You don't gain time by that.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, I got two for you.
Okay.
Now my first one is more of a training philosophy, so not necessarily hurdle specific, but I think you'll be able to answer this pretty well. Okay, so every program should train all sprinters as 400-meter runners. In other words, train to the middle. The genetically fast will gravitate down toward the 1 and the 2. The slower runners will move up in distance to the 800.
I would say partially agree to that, and that may just be how we have it in our program, where we do delineate between sprinters being 100 to 400, and then above 400, essentially, the 400, 800, you can have a boundary there. But we divide our sprinters once we kind of know who they are. We have like our what we call our short sprint group, which is your 100-meter 110-meter hurdle specialists, your 100-meter 200-meter runners, and then if you're 300 400 specialist, or if you're a high hurdler that 300s, you're going to go be in that what we call the long sprint group. But I think one of our successes as a program has been when we find the athletes that are in that middle ground, like you said, we train all of them to be like a 400 runner, whether or not they're a 300 hurdler, a 400 runner, or depending on the 800, it depends if they're 8, 16. So we kind of have to make that differentiation too.
Right. Okay, perfect. Okay, and then your last agree or disagree question. And now I'm talking about your sprint group as a whole. Your fastest 100-meter runners should not run the 100 or the 110 hurdles, and your fastest 400-meter runners should not run the 300-meter hurdles. They should be left alone to run those events as open events. Your middle of the pack sprinters are the target runners for the hurdles.
That's a disagree too, and that's actually a conversation that Kevin and Sue Wright and I have often. That we look at our athletes and we look at where is the best potential as individuals, but then where is the best potential as a team. And of course, I'm going to try to make every 400-meter runner possible into a 300-meter hurdler. But if we feel that the 300 hurdles are set, we're going to keep kids in the 400 to let them work through that. And then if we feel like maybe that's not the best, then we can come back. But I feel we've had a great balance, being able to kind of figure out like, okay, I put eyes on an athlete and say, I think they should try hurdles, 300 hurdles, but they're training as a 400 runner. And then I work on the technique piece. And if I feel that they'll be successful, we usually keep them there. But we try to create that balance to spread the wealth in terms of points, especially at the bigger meets, that we want to make sure we're covering all of our events too.
Now, I had to ask that one because Sakel is constantly trying to steal everybody from the 100 and the 400 to run the hurdles. So I
Yeah.
sad to see if he was nuts or not.
No, yeah, I think all hurdle coaches want to do that. And on the short sprint side, that's the same thing too. That, if we feel that the success can be in the high hurdles, then that's what we'll try to do. Or if it's in the open, as we've had a few like really fast sprinters in the last handful of years, there was no question for them to stay in the open 100 because I don't think they would have translated that speed to the hurdles. So
Gotcha. Cool. Okay.
All right.
Yeah, we're gonna jump into hurdle specific stuff. So Jake, why don't you take it away here?
Yeah, and I may or may not add one or two things question wise on this that are a little bit more hurdle specific. But what are this is kind of philosophy in coaching hurdles. What are the top three technical aspects of this event that a high school athlete must have or must be mindful of? So top three.
yeah, that was a great question, and I definitely can come up with more than three, but I'll stick to three. And I would say these are in no particular order as a top three, but I think the first thing that comes to mind for me is hurdling has to be an extension of sprinting. And all of us right now here are sprint coaches, and we know the importance of sprint form and what your arms are doing, what your legs are doing. And what I talk to my hurdlers a lot about is that hurdling is just an extension of being a sprinter. So, taking the high hurdles specifically, you are going from point A to point B in a straight line. All of your energy, all of your effort, all of your mechanics needs to continue that energy in a straight line. Anything that deviates from that straight line is taking away energy that ultimately it's time, right? It's just going to slow you down. And so we talk a lot about um, putting that energy down the track. So lead leg extension, you don't want to be swinging that lead leg. It needs to be, and I show them sprint mechanics of like, hey, if you're just running, this is what it looks like, but here comes your lead leg. Notice it's not really much different. It's just coming off the ground and then coming back down to the ground in a different way. Trail leg, same thing. It's got the same form, but it just happens to be going to the side of you. So I think that's one of my first ones that really just emphasizing that you are a sprinter. You just happen to have 10 barriers or 8 barriers to get over. The second kind of technical aspect, and this is a tricky one, that it's such a technical event, specifically the high hurdles. It's like a puzzle, and the puzzle pieces don't always get put together all at the same time. And so I kind of divide this up into terms of what do we do with our upper body? So that would be arms, lead arm, trail arm, shoulders, head, and then your lower body being lead leg, trail leg. And then the third component is that speed aspect. And so in the high hurdles being such a technique specific event where you're trying to go as fast as you can with as few steps as you can, um, all of that technique that your upper body and lower body are doing will be the difference between a 3-step, a 4-step, and a 5-step. We all know all athletes, all hurdlers, their ultimate goal as a high hurdler is to be a 3-step. And some athletes are ready for that right away. Sometimes it takes time. Some athletes won't get there, but I've seen athletes that 4-step and can run sub 16 as a girl. And so it's not the limitation factor. It's all about the technique and how you can keep your feet on the track to keep that speed piece. So that piece is big. And then I think the other big kind of technique philosophy is flexibility. And I put it on here 3 times. You got to have flexibility, 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 because I tell my athletes, we are not born to be hurdlers. Our bodies are not designed to be hurdlers. We have to train our bodies to be hurdlers. And how that happens is to get our muscles flexible in a way that allows the range of motion to go back to what I mentioned earlier with the upper body, lower body, and keeping straight down the track. If you're not flexible, your body's going to be constantly twisting and losing that energy going down the track. And so I've done this probably since year 1 of coaching, but all the hurdlers, high hurdlers, 300 hurdlers, they warm up the same way, same drills, every day, regardless of what they're doing, whether it's an interval practice, a skill-based practice, a meet day. They're warming up, and it takes them 20 minutes at least to get through everything. And we've actually incorporated some of those warm-ups with all of our sprinters and our throwers and our jumpers. So we try to incorporate that because we've all realized the importance of flexibility for injury prevention and things like that. But I think those are the big ones that I feel as a hurdle coach, that if I could, take a new kid that's new to track and want them to hurdle, these are the things that we'll talk about throughout the season.
Yeah, that's good.
All right, our next is kind of a progression question, and I might add something on here just because I'm interested to hear your opinion on this, because it's always one of those things in terms of, obviously it's a technical event, but it's a technical event with obviously an obstacle that goes along with that. So what does a typical week look like for a hurdler? But also, can you touch on a little bit about like height progression in terms of your training? So when are you high, when are you low in terms of that hurdle height, and maybe some purpose around that in terms of what you're trying to focus in on in terms of that specific training aspect, if that makes sense.
Sure. Yeah. No. Yeah. That's a great question. So I'll start with the height component first. So one thing that I, as a coach early in my career, decided was we will do all of our drills, warm ups, workouts at least one notch below race height. Now, for a girl high hurdler, you can't go one notch below race height because the hurdle is bottomed out. But for high hurdle boys that are high hurdlers, they're doing everything at least 36 inches. So that's the intermediate hurdle height. And I guess the high hurdles, the girls can go down those 3 inches. The low hurdles can't go down. But everything that they do is typically that one notch low. And the reason is I tell the kids 3 inches is not going to make a difference of whether or not you're clearing the barrier or not. And it's more for the fact of like kind of mind over matter sometimes with kids that are really struggling with the height. One of the challenges we face with athletes coming into programs from middle school programs to high school is boys, 8th grade boys hurdle at, I believe, 30 inches. And then they come into high school and it's 39. And so 9 inches is a huge, huge gap for those boys to get comfortable with. Girls, they go from 30 to 33, so it's not as big of a deal. So sometimes what I have to do with boys who want to high hurdle, I sometimes have to use the 300 hurdles as, I call it the gateway event, where I got to get them comfortable at least hurdling, even if it's a longer distance, but sometimes they feel more comfortable at 36 inches versus 39. Plus, the skill and technique in 300 hurdles early on in a career is not as important as high hurdles, where there's such a small distance between, where if you make one technical mistake, your foot is low, all of a sudden you're going to be on the track, and we don't want injuries or things like that. So from the height standpoint, that's kind of what I do. I train, again, drills, workouts, everything is 3 inches low. For 300 hurdles specifically, we tend to keep them at race height. But if for a younger hurdler, I may go 3 inches low, especially for boys, just to get them comfortable. And then for like a typical week, as far as like a progression through the week. So if we have a Wednesday meet, which most seasons now, that seems to be when our dual meets are, Mondays are typically interval days. And so I will typically have the high hurdlers and 300 hurdlers with me. High hurdlers will have a high hurdle specific workout. 300 hurdlers will have a 300 hurdle specific workout. And of course, I can't be in two places at once. So typically I'm with one of the groups based on, what needs to happen, I guess. High hurdles sometimes can just be automatic because they're just going through reps. 300, sometimes we're working on some more technical aspects that you need to have in terms of the phases of the race. So that's like a Monday. Tuesdays are typically, if the Wednesday is the meet, Tuesdays are our technique / event prep. And so we're getting warmed up, we're focusing on the little things. And then usually what we do is they do at least 3 starts over at least 3 hurdles, but no more than 5 hurdles. So we keep the number of hurdle reps low, and I keep the attempts low as well. The goal is to just work on that quickness coming out, the technique going over, and not getting that the pounding on the legs. We don't need to do that because we just had a workout the day before. So we need to give them a break for that. Wednesday's the meet. Now, if it's a Thursday meet instead of a Wednesday meet, then we kind of shuffle a little bit where the starts happen on the Wednesday and it's still a skill-based, technique-based day on Tuesday. And then, of course, we have hurdlers that do other events. We have to make sure that, with their jumpers, they get time with the jumps, and pole vault gets time with the pole vault because we're unique where our pole vault coach is only there on certain days. So we have to work on that aspect of it. But I think for a typical week, I think that's pretty standard. And of course, early in the season, we're doing high hurdles are doing more hurdle reps, longer distances, more like I really do count the number of hurdles they're attempting in addition to the distance they're running, because it is impact on both, which is different than a sprinter. High hurdlers are going to do more of their long reps, they're more attempts over the hurdles early in the season, and then we back off as we go. And then 300 hurdlers, we actually they don't typically do a true 300 hurdle workout until after spring break. We train them truly as 400 runners. They get their skill and their technique base when they're working with the hurdlers, whether you're a high or a 300 hurdler. They're getting all of that, and we do some striding drills too. But 300s is tough because you can't have the reps like you can in high hurdles because it's just a longer distance. And so that's been successful. I think when we switched to that philosophy a number of years ago to train them truly as a 300, 400 meter athlete, because a lot of times the 300 hurdlers are doing the 4x4. And so we need to make sure they're in the best shape they can be. That's been pretty successful. But I know the hurdlers, the 300 hurdlers specifically, they do enjoy when I finally get to take them from the 400 intervals because they think it's easier, but it's not easier. It's harder. Or at least equivalent. They always think like, oh, hurdles is easy. I'm like, no, we're still doing what they're doing. We just get to jump over things.
Yeah, just have an obstacle. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
So this kind of goes into that training philosophy too. So I had kind of 2 questions. One, and I think you answered a little bit of the one, but how often are you adding that obstacle, the hurdle, to the sprint specific workout? So not a non-technique day. Are you adding hurdles to your workout, and how often do you do that? Or is there again, do you wait at certain portions of the season and kind of keep it just for the skill-based day? Kind of go over that a little bit.
Yeah. So, I would say the skill-based days we're doing, we might be doing a lot of things over like 3 to 4 hurdles. Again, at that lower level, just to focus on speed technique that we talked about earlier. I really try to and this is a philosophy change that I had early in my career where it's like, we have kids that get shin splints and other just kind of repetitive use type of injuries. And so I started to make that change with some of those athletes and realized we don't need to do 10 times over 10 hurdles every week because that's too much. It's 1,000 meters and 100 hurdles. It's not necessary. And so it really depends on the week. And of course, our season's unique where we have spring break in the middle and you have some kids that are there, some kids that aren't. And so you have to kind of, it's a recovery time, but then it's also, we come back from spring break and we can also go a little bit harder for that week or two. But really, I think the skill-based days, high hurdlers, you're talking 3 to 4 hurdles, 300 hurdlers. To keep them with me on the home stretch when I'm working with the high hurdlers, I've created some marks on the tracks where they can work on their technique and their striding, not necessarily at the distance that the race distance is, but they can work on their consistency of striding with their right lead leg, left lead leg alternating. And it's over a distance of say like 70 meters instead of 150 meters. And so we call those striding drills. And that's something I started a number of years ago too. And it's a nice break for them and some kids, if they're waiting for a coach in another event, they can come over and do their striding and then they can go back to that event too.
Yeah, I think it's funny you say that because I think when I first started coaching hurdles, I was the amount of full 100 hurdles I had kids running in practice, I was like, I look back on it now and I'm like, oh my gosh, I don't even, what was I thinking in terms of that? Like grants, because like you said, it's such a, it's such a unique thing because you're essentially, you know, creating force that's greater than what they're ever going to get sprinting. And so you got to be really, you know, cognitive of that in your training, which makes it unique because you still want them to get reps.
Yeah.
Because it's so
Yeah, and
technical.
it's a balance. It's a true balance. And you know, the kids, especially the kids that are really starting to get things figured out, and maybe they're on the verge of 4-step to 3-step or 5-step to 4-step, and you have to shut them down. And they're
Yeah.
like, just one more. I'm like, no, not today. Like
Yeah.
the hurdles will be here tomorrow. And I think that less is more mentality. It's a you know, it's important in hurdles and other technique based events because some of the kids that fall in love with these type of events, they will literally go until you tell them to stop. And you know, sometimes it's okay to like, okay, let's end on a good note. You got one more, okay, we're done. We'll come back to it tomorrow or Thursday or whatever day it might be. So
yeah. Oh, that's awesome. Well, thanks. I really appreciate you kind of add that aspect to it
yeah,
in terms of what
absolutely.
we were looking at. So our next question is, and this is kind of looking at hurdles. And I'm interested to hear your philosophy on this because I always, to me, I'm always focused on hip height as a sort of spectrum of would an athlete or could an athlete do the hurdles. It's kind of like my brain just automatically goes there. So what do you look for in an athlete to be successful in that? And because I know you've coached them, and I know I've coached some people that sort of don't fit the mold necessarily all the time. So what are you looking for with that?
So as far as I'll kind of break this up into two parts. So there's kind of the tangibles, right? And then there's the athletic intangibles, I guess, if you wanted to call it that. So some of the things that I look for, one, you have to have great work ethic because you don't get to wave this magic wand, this magic hurdle wand, and you get to be great right away. And it takes time. And so the kids need to be invested in getting better and be willing to put in the time for that. So I look for kids that whether I know them at school previously or if maybe it's, you know, they're out at practice and they're willing to try it and they're the ones that are staying after to get extra help. And so if they want to be there, then I'm more than happy to do that. And then that's where that work ethic piece comes in. The grit and tenacity piece, you know, coaching other sports at Burlington Edison, I have and had the opportunity to look at athletes in different sports, and all of a sudden, I don't know what it is for me. It's I guess you can think of it as like a beautiful mind, but the hurdle version, where I just kind of see like, hey, that athlete, I think they might be a good hurdler. And it could be because they have some speed, they have some athletic tendencies in terms of like a vertical, which doesn't necessarily translate to hurdles. But again, that grit and tenacity piece. So I'll talk specific to when I coached girls basketball for 10 years. I was always kind of keeping an eye open for athletes that would maybe want to do track if they weren't doing other sports, and then trying to get maybe the possibility of like, hey, that they could be a pretty good hurdler, I think, because they literally will go run through a wall for you. And then that's that piece of work ethic and tenacity that again, those intangibles, I guess, that sometimes these kids just inherently have. Um, from the athletic tendency standpoint, you know, of course, the flexibility is helpful. You know, I've coached a lot of football players. You know, Bruce Shearer, who was a longtime football coach, track coach here at Burlington Edison, he wanted his football players, if you're not doing baseball or other sports, you're out doing track. And he had specific event groups that were his position athletes. So for example, if you were a linebacker, you were going to go do hurdles because or a defensive end and body type didn't matter. I've coached athletes that they probably could run through the hurdle literally, um, but teaching them that skill. But again, that's the component where the skills translate between sports too, right? So it's like the skills that they learn as a hurdler specifically it could translate to them on the football field by being able to have a quicker reaction time, or depending on what their position is, having their hip mobility. If you're a defensive back, being able to rotate when the receiver's moving, like all of that translates. And I know the three of us here, and I'm sure many coaches out there too, know the importance of multi-sport athletes, especially at small high schools like ours. And one sport can benefit the other. But I think that part is what I look for. And then track specific, we have a lot of athletes. Just if I look at my time as a coach, a lot of my hurdlers are pole vaulters, and they're also the horizontal jumps. So there's a lot of correlation there too. And so, Gudgel with the jumps and Rob with the pole vault and myself, we have a great way to share athletes and making sure that they can get the skill, because they're all technique events. But all of that translates. Like if they go spend a day at jumps, that's not going to hurt their hurdling. It can only help when we come back, and focus on the hurdle specific and vice versa. So hopefully I answered the question, but that's kind of what I look for, kind of in an athlete. And I guess the last piece to add to that is trying to encourage athletes to try hurdles. It can be hard because it is a scary event. They might have fallen in middle school if they tried it, or like, no, a lot of times it's just give it a try. And I have different ways to kind of just, let's do the drills and don't worry about hurdling first, or we'll go onto the grass. If you do fall, the grass is softer. But I do like to say this, that all good hurdlers fall at least once. But then they'll ask me, well, did you ever fall? And I said, no. I said, good hurdlers. I was a great hurdler.
Yeah,
I came close a lot of times. And Johnny, you know this. If you run on cinder, you learn not to fall because cinder hurts.
Yeah, you learn to clear hurdles a lot easier, I think, probably on cinder.
You get a reminder in the form of a massive rock burn from that cinder track.
And rocks and other things that could be in that dirt track. So I ran on cinder for 3 of my 4 years. So
well, and the spikes are a hazard when you get around on cinder too, because it's a whole nother.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, they're a little longer.
Yeah, I love what you said about the mentality aspect of it, because in terms of male athletes that coached in hurdles, the one that had the most success was 5'7", and he was the fastest 110 hurdler I've ever coached, and it 100%. Obviously, he was fast, but it 100% had to do with mental tenacity. I mean, he just when you say attack the hurdle, he was the definition of attack the hurdle. There was nobody that was going to get to the hurdle quicker than he was, regardless of what was happening outside of that. And state championship, he was so amped up for the 300 hurdles, he biffed it on the first hurdle, rolled over, got back up, kept running, and he still ran a 37. It was like one of the most amazing things I've ever seen. It was also one of those things when we got done, I was like, if you hadn't fallen, what you would have ran. Like you ran 37, toppling over. I was like, I could not. It was a balance between being like super impressed and proud, and also going, man, if you just made that first hurdle.
Right. And you bring up a good point where it's, now when I was a hurdler in high school, I was a 6 foot as a freshman, 6'3" as a senior. So of course height helps, and I had speed, but you don't have to be tall to be a hurdler. Some of my best hurdlers that I've coached, I'll name drop like Abby DeMock. She might be 5'4" on a good day. Now she was a 300 hurdler, but she was like, she would beat girl. I would always joke with her at like the state meet when they would, they'd call out the lineups, and you'd have like, lane 1 was this tall, lane 2 was this tall, and then Abby, and then and then I'd turn to someone and go, she's going to beat them all. And she would. And that's what I tell my athletes. I go, you don't have to be tall. You just have to be willing to put in the time. You have to have that mental toughness, that tenacity. And on the 300 standpoint specifically, the kids that are the difference makers, those athletes that are truly like a once in a career type of kid, which I've been lucky to have a few, they have what I call the go button. And it sounds like, Jake, your athlete was like this, that when that gun went off in the 300 hurdles, they will not stop literally going as fast as they can go until they reach the end. And the athlete that I've coached, probably the one that stands out the most, is Brandon Grandy and Mitch Weason. I guess the two guys, like, they literally would run down anyone if there was anyone in front of them, or they would run away from everyone and make sure they didn't get caught. And that's something you can't coach. You can't, it's just this inherent thing that they will just run, again, that run through a wall mentality.
Yeah.
Abby was that way. Chelsea Genther was that way, and not to say that athletes now don't do that, but it's just a difference. And we see that at the higher level. When you get to the state meet, you see those kids that they will just go. And like you said, your athlete probably would have gone sub 36 if he hadn't fallen.
Oh,
so.
it was pretty crazy. So, but, all right, I think we have enough time. We really like to hear a little bit about sort of your influences. So if you can kind of give us who or what have been your three biggest influences in your coaching philosophy, and why. And it can be people, it can be things that you've read, so resources, any of those things that sort of have been the biggest impact on you.
Yeah, this is a great question. And it's, as I said earlier, that, I wasn't a track kid until I got into high school. And I really probably didn't fall in love with it until my junior year. And I just kind of went through the motions. But when my junior year came along, I mentioned my hurdle coach was Don Erickson, longtime coach at Burlington Edison. He was the head coach for a number of years. And when he was coaching at that time, he had retired from teaching. But when I was a freshman, I didn't, most freshmen don't know what they want to do, especially if they've never done track. And there was one day I was sitting in the stands and he goes, "Hey, Wallace, why don't you come over and what do you think about trying hurdles?" I'm like, "Yeah, I'm not really interested." And he goes, "Well, I'll get you interested, or I'll get you to like it," or something like that. And so he saw something in me as a freshman. It might have been my height, maybe, as a 6-foot freshman. But I know Kevin mentioned this in his episode, that Don comes from that old school mentality. And I owe a lot to him as an athlete. I owe a lot to him as a coach, because I got to coach with him for a few years. He came back and helped when I was coaching. But I'll also say that there's things I take from him that makes me who I am, but there's also things that I told myself I would never be like. And I bet a lot of coaches that we've all had, you can take the positives and the non-positives of any coach and say, I'm going to try to be the best version of that. But I would say Don gave me a lot of my toughness piece, where I didn't, I didn't have that, like, that killer attitude. I didn't play football, but I think he encouraged that with me. So I owe a lot to him. And I do have to say that when I was running races, 300 hurdles, 400, there was only one voice I could hear. It wasn't my mom. It wasn't my dad. It was Don Erickson. And if it was the hurdles, it was get down, meaning my lead leg has got to get down. That to this day, it brings me maybe nightmares. But so Don is one. I would probably say, even though I'm mentioning him second, I think the most influential on the track side is Kevin Gudgel, because he gave me the opportunity as a young sophomore in college, freshly graduated from high school, only a year out. And, he came in my junior year, and I mentioned where I kind of fell in love with track my junior year. And he was my sprint coach. So I got to work with him with intervals as a 400 runner, and then I would work with Don with the hurdles. But Kevin's mentality and philosophy as a coach, I could see the difference, because Don was old school, but Kevin was, I don't think you call it new school, but it was just a different way to coach. And I really took to that. And then as an assistant coach for him for now 23 years, we're great friends, and we both love track and field. But as an influence of me on a coach, he's trusted me with the part of his program with hurdles and sprints and starts, and where that I can't, I'm completely appreciative of that, and knowing that I'm not going to do anything to wreck an athlete or to impact an event. So Kevin is definitely up there, and then the third one was a tough one because I've had so many great coaches over the years, especially with youth sports. But I do have to say Bruce Shear. I had the opportunity to coach Bruce or with Bruce for almost I want to say 15 years in track, and then we coached together in basketball for 5. And I go back to my early years of coaching, and his sons, all 3 of his boys, they were great football players, went off to play collegiately. He trusted me 100%. He was a head track coach in Alaska, and he trusted a young hurdle coach to coach his sons, and he never once questioned what I did. He knew that I was doing the right thing, and that would help his boys be good hurdlers, good athletes, good kids, and then that would translate to football. And then the things I learned from Bruce coaching with him in basketball too, just the non-sport specific, just the ways to view coaching in general, and not to sweat the small stuff. And basketball is a grind, and there's just different pressures, and learning the different aspects, and I've carried that into my head coaching too. So those 3, Don, Kevin, and Bruce, are probably the most influential on me as a coach, assistant, and head coach.
Cool. So since you did so well in agree or disagree segment, we have rapid fire still, but only 2 questions each. So I'll start us off with rapid fire. And again, Ryan, we're looking for 1 to 2 word answers. First thing that comes to mind.
Okay.
Now, what the audience probably may or may not know about you is that you are a beer brewer. You're a maker of beer. Does that have a specific name?
Right now it's just like Wallace Brew House. The pipe dream. People always ask, would I ever open up a brewery someday? And I said, maybe, but if someone would just let me come brew with them at their brewery, I'd be happy with that too, which I have done. But Wallace Brew House is, I guess, the kind of the name right now. If I were to open my own brewery, it would probably be called Hoppin' Mad.
Nice.
And the logo would be like a hop cone with like an angry face on it, which I actually do have designed. Someone designed it for me.
That's great. What's your favorite beer that you've personally brewed?
My favorite, that's hard to say. I would probably say my Irish Red is probably my number 1, because that was the one I actually sat next to Jake and his wife at that competition, and happened to win best of show. And I think that year there was 270 entries, and my entry won out of all of them, and I got to brew up at Colshan. And for those out there that don't know my background, I'm a science teacher, and so I find the passion in home brewing to be the science of it. And I guess that could also be argued with the coaching hurdle side of it too. I might experiment with something with a drill or a technique, but I just like to see different outcomes, especially, of course, on the beer brewing side. So
now, you mentioned science teacher. Did I read also that you teach astronomy?
I do. Oh, sorry, go ahead and finish your question.
I was gonna say, what's your favorite constellation?
I should have looked that up. No, it's oh gosh, Ursa Major, I guess. That's the Great Bear. That's the one that's got the Big Dipper in it, which is not a constellation out there. It's an asterism. So here's your science lesson for today.
Wow.
But yeah, Ursa Major, and that's also a constellation we can see here in the Skagit Valley most of the year. So,
all right, Jake,
how
are you?
Yeah, you spent most of your time in Washington, especially obviously coaching. What other state would you want to work / coach in?
Does it have to be a state, or could it be a country?
Sure, country, go for it.
I've always said if I didn't live here, my family and I didn't live here, it would be in Scotland somewhere. And my family lineage is predominantly Scottish. And I had an opportunity about 20 years ago to go visit. I actually got to visit living relatives in Scotland and got to see where my great grandfather lived. Um, if I could live and coach, I of course would still live here, but maybe take a year or two and take my family over there. I would coach track and field and then Scottish Highland games, specifically the caber toss.
Yeah, all right.
Yes.
We'll talk after this is over about some Highland game stuff.
Okay.
Event you would add to high school track. So currently, right now in Washington, what would be an event that you would add to high school track?
We've talked the coaches here. We've all talked about this because it's an uneven number between boys and girls events right now, and so most would say boys 4x2, but I think like a sprint medley would be. I know we do that at certain track meets. They throw in the sprint medley, specifically the 1-1-2-4. I just think that gives, going back to earlier what we talked about with kind of the philosophies of training, like that splits your sprinters, right? You have your short sprinters and long sprinters competing together, which that's always an exciting. And even the 2-2-4-8 is a good one, but I like the 1-1-1-2-4.
Great.
All right.
Anything else from you, Jake?
Nope, I think that's it.
Coach Wallace, thank you so much for being here with us. Hopefully the folks listening picked up a bunch. I know hurdles is such a tough event, and it's really hard to find good quality help and coaches in those events. We're so lucky to have Coach Suckheld, and I know that Burlington is extremely lucky to have you there too. So thanks for joining us, and thanks for talking track with us today.
Yeah, absolutely. I appreciate it. And thanks for the conversation. And like I said, I'm always happy to talk track anytime.
All righty, my man. Thank you.
Thanks, Ryan.
Thank you.